300 total yards and 3 passing touchdowns in a Thanksgiving debut. Oh, look, who's the other guy that did that? That is Aaron Rodgers. Definitely good company you want to be in if you were Jordan Love. Packers now riding a 2-game win streak, and we have our guys, Todd Fuhrman and Tyler Sullivan, to kind of recap this Packers-Lions game. Guys, Lions were favored in this matchup. A lot of folks thinking that Detroit was going to win this one. I want to talk about the biggest takeaways for the Lions. They're now 8-3 here. They've lost not 2 in a row, but we thought it was going to be 2 in a row. It was a very close game against the Bears. And Todd, I'll start with you. What does this Lions team do? They're in a close one with Chicago. They lose to the Packers. Moving forward, you got to think that's going to impact their momentum at some point.
It almost appears, Jacqueline, like this team needs a reset because they're not starting on time. It's not once, but it's now twice against divisional opponents. And for the first half of this football game, they were unable to match the Green Bay Packers' energy, found themselves behind the 8 ball early in the contest. And while I know a lot of people will point to the Lions' defense, I mean, Green Bay really only put together 2 length of the field drives. It was the offense creating some of those short fields that were there. And other than that blip that we saw late in the game where Jared Goff helped the Lions come back down 12 points against the Bears, picked up right where he left off for the better part of 3.5 quarters. So I think this mini bye that the Lions will have going into next week comes at a perfect time for a team that now has to handle life with a target on their back and a little bit of prosperity. They can't be the plucky underdog anymore, and if they're not going to bring their A game, look, this is a league where even some of the worst teams can beat you on their best days, and the Lions are learning that the hard way against the Bears, who they slip by, and of course losing is more than a touchdown favorite today against the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, like you were saying, Todd, is the turnovers, specifically with Jared Goff. I mean, when you are turning the ball over multiple times in a game like he did in this one, it wasn't interceptions, it was fumbles. 3 on the day, 1 of them returned for a touchdown. Probably should have had a 4th in that second half. You're not going to win many football games. I don't care if you're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, the Philadelphia Eagles, or the Chicago Bears, or the Green Bay Packers, teams that are currently outside of the playoffs. When you start giving the ball away in that fashion, you're going to start losing football games. And so this is what is going to kind of be saying the quiet part out loud. It's, what is Jared Goff going to do over these next few weeks to reinstill that confidence that the Detroit Lions can make a significant run? They have the pieces on offense. They have the pieces on defense. They have good coaching. But it seems like Goff has kind of put them in a bad spot in these last couple of games. Like we were saying, they won last week. He was able to turn it on and able to lead them to victory over against Chicago. We kind of thought maybe for a minute he'd do it here, but ultimately he didn't. And now we're going to be asking him to do that against whether it's Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts in the NFC. You know, if they make it to a Super Bowl, that's Patrick Mahomes, and that's a whole other can of worms as well. So when they start going up against these elite quarterbacks, against these elite defenses, and these elite teams, is Jared Goff going to be able to step up, or are we going to see some turnovers like we saw over these last few weeks?
Yeah, and you see it there. It's really been a tale of 2 parts of the seasons for Jared Goff. In the first 9 games, he had 5 turnovers, and just in the last 2, he has 6 of them. So you'd hope that Jared Goff can, of course, take care of the football moving forward. Let's talk about the other team, the Packers. Jordan Love having a great game. They've now won 2 straight after beating the Chargers last week. Now the Lions. And Tyler, I'll ask you, they get Kansas City coming up. How important was this win for not only Jordan Love's confidence, but the whole team? We saw guys like Christian Watson step up. How important is that before you get a team like Kansas City on your schedule?
Of course, anytime you're facing a division opponent, that's going to be circled, especially in a one-off game, Thanksgiving, big spot, national television. You want to treat this like a not a playoff game, but something a little bit more than just your regular season game. And so when you have Jordan Love playing to the level that he played, I thought this was his best game of the season. I mean, 22 of 32, 268 yards, 3 touchdowns. He looked like he was in total command of this offense and didn't really seem fazed. I mean, I really even liked towards the end of this game too, keeping the ball on that read option, going for what was a dagger, basically just somewhat, I think it was a 20-something yard run that he went on in that game, actually 37-yard run, really kind of put his stamp on this game. And so when you're starting to talk about looking at other opponents, and obviously the Kansas City Chiefs coming up, they're not going to be favored in that game, just like they weren't favored in this one. But I think that you can point to games like this and say, hey, listen, we can go into hostile environments. We can go up against teams that are in first place in their division division, and we have a quarterback that can help lead us to that type of a victory. So it's a confidence builder looking from Jordan Love. It's confidence builder when you look all across the roster to say, hey, we can go against anybody in this league and have a puncher's chance. And I think that's what you'll see going forward as well.
I mean, Tyler, when you look at this Green Bay team, suddenly it's a side that a lot of us wrote off for being dead and buried, but they're essentially a half game out of the playoff race in the NFC. You look at some of the competition that they have right around them. It's the Seahawks, who are a touchdown underdog later this evening. The Minnesota Vikings, who have taken sharp money against them on Monday Night Football in a divisional matchup against the Bears. And while I know a lot of people will point towards Green Bay playing in primetime next week against the Chiefs, the next 3 games after that, extremely winnable for this Packers side. When you look at a road trip to MetLife Stadium to take on the Giants, a home date against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then a road trip against Carolina, suddenly we're looking at a potential Week 17 matchup if Green Bay continues to play good football on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. That could go a long way in terms of defining what that back half of the NFC playoff picture looks like. Green Bay does need to get healthier, and I think that was the biggest surprise, what they were able to do defensively in this spot. And sure, Jared Goff deserves a ton of credit. Didn't appear to be on the same page as most of his receivers early on in this game, but Green Bay generated pressure. They made life difficult, and if you get guys like Devondre Campbell back in the fold, you get Jair Alexander coming back from that back injury that has kept him sidelined for stretches at a time this year, suddenly Green Bay starts to resemble a little bit more of the football team that a lot of people had called a potential dark horse to get in if Jordan Love was able to figure out what his potential looked like. And the receiving core looks significantly better now if they're able to spread it around and get Christian Watson to be a focal point on the deep ball, use Romeo Doubs to operate at the intermediate and underneath levels, and of course Jaden Reed coming into his own, operating out of the slot as a legitimate red zone target on top of that.
Yeah, our colleague Pete Prisco in the offseason, he was really, really high on the Packers, and at first it looked like he was crazy, but now it's starting to come to fruition, at least if you look at the last 2 games there. Guys, okay, we looked at the NFC playoff picture. Still with this loss, the Lions still lead the division. The Vikings, as of right now, have that wild card spot. The Packers are on the outside looking in. What is your, I guess, panic level for the Lions at this point, Tyler, after what you saw these last 2 games? Are you confident they can end on top of the division?
Yeah, I think if we're going to go panic meter 1 through 10, 10 being that the house is on fire, I'd probably go somewhere like a 6, 6.5. Maybe you can convince me to go to 7. But ultimately, they have built a little bit of a cushion. You hope that they're going to be able to kind of turn the tides here, specifically with Jared Goff not committing those turnovers. But if those things continue, you're not going to be, slam dunk against any team. And let's not overshadow this. They still have 2 games to play against the Minnesota Vikings on their schedule. So if all of a sudden Joshua Dobbs continues to be this dude that can just show up anywhere, any place, anytime, and ball out on a weekly basis, well, then that's going to be a tough opponent, especially if they get Justin Jefferson back at this point. So ultimately, you're looking at your number 2 in the division with 2 games against them, and they're playing hot, and you're kind of going in that different direction. If you don't turn things around quickly, we've seen collapses in the second half of seasons before, and it would be something poetic if it started really on Thanksgiving for the Detroit Lions, where a season decline would happen. So again, I still think they'll be okay, but ultimately you have now 2 teams in the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings kind of nipping at their heels a little bit.
I'm kind of with you there, Tyler. I don't think it's reason to panic for the Lions just yet by any stretch of the imagination, but we are starting to see a little bit more vulnerability from this secondary, not just in the last 2 weeks, but we saw it on the road against the Chargers, where it was the Lions offense that had to save the day with a 41-38 victory. And when you look at the Lions' upcoming schedule, they're going to have to do a lot of damage away from home. 4 out of their next 5 games will all be on the road. But given the fortuitous bounce, only one of their remaining games this year will actually be played outside in the elements, and that'll be at Soldier Field on December 10th. You get the Dallas Cowboys on the road, you get the Minnesota Vikings away from home, but climate-controlled conditions, which has to be a little bit of a breath of fresh air, knowing how Jared Goff has struggled in the elements. But this is a Lions team that has gone through some ebbs and flows, talked about them potentially having an inside track to being the number 1 seed in the NFC, given how much more favorable their schedule looked than what the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the 49ers all had to go through. Last week, they escaped by the skin on their teeth against the Chicago Bears, erasing that 12-point deficit. Today, they give one away that odds makers believe they would win. And now they'll have their hands full on the road against the New Orleans Saints next week to see if they can bounce back. But I think Detroit's still in a good position. They just have to do a little bit of soul searching and get this offense back to performing at a high level and try and solidify the back end of that defense that was a strength early in the year, but is starting to remind us by the week a lot more of the 2022 edition that could not get off the field against any passing attack that actually had a pulse.
Todd, Tyler, we appreciate you guys. Happy Thanksgiving, tapping in with us, especially on a holiday.